As a child, I always had an inquisitive mind and an eye for detail. I'd be the type of child that collected beetles and butterflies and moths and insects, and I suppose that eye for detail led to a natural progression. After spending 11 years in the New South Wales Police Force and being retired on medical grounds because of injuries I sustained in that pursuit, I then always having a hunger for investigation and that hunger being fed from my experience in the police, decided to move on into the private investigation industry. And really, investigation is very similar to fishing. You need to know where to look for the fish. You need to know what sort of bait to use to catch the fish. You need to know the type of equipment. You need to know where to cast the lure and select the right lure. And when you do hook up the quarry, you need to know how to fight it, how to wind it in, how to get it back into the boat. And all of those things really are synergist to the investigation industry. We have here a bit of a museum. This is the Lyonswood Museum, so to speak. It's just a representation of some of the equipment that we've used over the years. It's not all of the equipment by any stretch of the imagination, but there are many pieces of equipment in here that give an indication of how the investigation industry has changed. If you look at this little tiny Minox camera here, this was from the 40s, and this was a camera that spies used, and it actually took film. So cameras have always been small, but technology today has enabled us to take photographs and send them by telephone. We can have instant information. The most common cases that come through my door are the location of missing persons, but missing persons can be missing for all sorts of reasons. They could be avoiding their responsibilities. They could have run up a debt. Somebody wants to get together a school reunion. They could be missing because they just don't want to be found and don't want to talk to family members. Investigations can vary from a few minutes, that could be just a very quick computer search to locate somebody, to in fact years in duration. I once had a man come to me and he told me he'd lost his pet, and I questioned him about the pet, and he said, well, it's an unusual pet. And I said, well, you know, what was it, a lizard? And he said, no, he said, actually it was a ruby-haired tarantula from South America. And I just looked at him and I said, a what? He said, a ruby-haired tarantula. And I said, what, you've lost it? And I said, well, what are the chances of finding it? He said, no, he said, I think it's been stolen. He said, I think somebody that I know that also collects spiders has stolen it. And he was right. It took us a while to work out how to get access to this person's house lawfully. So we had to devise a clever subterfuge to encourage him to invite us into his house, which he did. And when we were in the house, of course, we made mention of all of these glass cases and showed an appreciation of what he was collecting. He had reptiles and spiders. And of course, we knew exactly what this ruby-haired tarantula looked like because we'd had a photograph provided. And in fact, we did identify that spider within the house. The funny ending to this matter is that, of course, ruby-haired tarantulas are prohibited imports. So we actually had to report our client and the person who had stolen it both to AQUIS, Australian Quarantine Inspection Service. So at the end of an investigation, you still have a lawful obligation if you become aware that the activities of individuals are unlawful. This particular camera here is built into a briefcase, and the briefcase houses a camera with a right angle lens and a recording device there that took a VHS half-hour tape, and the lens was actually secreted in the end of the bag and in the badge at the bottom of the badge. The controls that were used to activate the camera and to play the camera are actually located on three tiny little buttons between the handle there. For all intents and purposes, this bag here just looks like a normal backpack, a backpack that most people use today, joggers and so forth. However, this is a backpack with a difference. The backpack actually has a miniature camera secreted into this little container that's attached to the bag, and you can see a tiny little eyelet at the bottom there, and that eyelet actually contains the tiny little lens, and the camera is actually a printed circuit board buried down there inside that little bag, and the lead actually is transferring the information down through the strap into the bottom of the bag here where a handy cam is recording it. So it's a different set of circumstances today, and I expect that in another 15 years this will be an antique. It'll be in that cabinet. I'm often asked what type of person I employ as an investigator, and I give the same response all the time and people look at me rather strangely. I look for people that can see with their ears, hear with their eyes and feel with their stomach. What I'm talking about here is intuitiveness. I'm talking about the intuition of an individual, the power of an individual to detect within another person deception. It is difficult work. You must also take into account that if you're a surveillance operative, for instance, and you're sitting in a car all day, you may not be able to get to a toilet. So you may be able to, or may have to, make other arrangements. It's quite exhilarating on occasions. It's quite frustrating on occasions. Quite often, the work of a surveillance operative is described as 99% boredom and 1% pure adrenaline. So it's about knowing when the person is going to do what you think they're going to do and being there at that time and catching them. So you need patience. Just like a fisherman, you need to be patient. You need to be patient to catch your quarry.